Well, this video is going to be focused on the paper called TabNN, a universal neural network solution for tabular data. The objective of this paper is to fill the gap of NN in tabular data learning. And they proposed TabNN, or tabular neural network in some sense, to automatically drive effective neural network architectures for tabular data, focusing on 1. Explicitly leverage expressive feature combinations, similar to things such as gradient boosting or random forest, and 2. To reduce the model complexity so that you don't end up having too many parameters, such as is the case if you want to use something like a many-layered, multi-layer perceptron on tabular domain. And at the core of their system, they have gradient boosting decision trees, and they conduct experimental analysis on a variety of datasets to demonstrate their proposed model's effectiveness. As you go through the introduction, the main point that they're trying to mention is that the great achievement of neural networks is mainly due to the deliberate design of its structures derived from the prior knowledge over the certain domains of data. The famous example being the convolutional neural networks utilizing the basically spatial locality by using local receptive fields. So the main proposed points in this introduction is that such neural architecture does not exist for tabular domain. They point out this is a study that indicates that using fully connected neural networks in tabular data often leads to unsatisfactory performance, and this is due to the very complex optimization hyperplanes and high risk of falling into local optimums. So the first page of the paper kind of paints a good picture in terms of the motivation of this work. Now, the objectives here, as mentioned in the abstract, is to explicitly leverage expressive feature combinations and reduce model complexity. Even though, in my opinion, these 2 points are kind of very interconnected and cannot be thought of as two completely separate concepts. But yeah, we can see that throughout this paper, there's been the main points of focus are these two: explicitly leverage expressive feature combinations, and the term explicit is kind of in contrast to the term implicit of when you have things such as fully connected neural networks. So they proposed TabNN. It's supposed to be a universal neural network solution for tabular data, which uses gradient boosting decision tree at its core. Just as a quick overview, it has 4 components. The first one is the automatic feature grouping. The second one is going to be the feature group reduction. And the third one is going to be the recursive encoder with shared embedding, or RESE. And the fourth one is going to be the transfer structured knowledge from GBDT, or the abbreviation which is TSKG. So let's wrap up the discussion of the contributions of this work. So they first identified 2 principles, which was first to explicitly leverage expressive feature combinations, and 2, to reduce the model complexity. They proposed TabNN, a general solution, and they conduct extensive experiments on tabular datasets. So let's go over the related works section of this paper. So they start by going through the main conventional works in this domain. They start by the tree-based models and the tabular data learning by using these tree-based models. They start by measuring the gradient boosting decision tree and the random forest. They mentioned that the successes of these approaches is majorly relied on their capability on iteratively picking the features with the most statistical information gain to build the trees. Then they go over the main problems with these models, mainly the conventional tree-based models. So the first one of these shortages is that they're hard to be integrated into an end-to-end framework. So when we're talking about neural networks, it's pretty easy and straightforward to put a trainable module containing many parameters in the middle of a pipeline, and then have the gradient flow help in training that as well. But GBDT and other tree-based models cannot be trained this way. To solve this problem, some solutions have been proposed. Soft decision trees or neural decision trees have been proposed. These papers are about that. And they've been basically focusing on differentiable decision functions instead of the non-differentiable axis line, the splits that in construction of these trees. But they mentioned that abandoning this basically kind of loses the automatic feature selection ability, which has to do with the first component that they mentioned, which relying on explicit feature combinational for the combination of features for obtaining representations. Another proposed solution was target propagation to pass back the error for non-differentiable functions, but this was also inefficient. The second major drawback of the tree-based models was that they are hard to be used for online training schemes, and you need to have like an overall overview of the data prior to proceeding with learning it, meaning that you're going to have an offline-based approach. As a solution to this problem, there have been models such as XGBoost and LightGBM that also provide a simple solution by learning the structure first and then keeping the tree fixed. So they learn the structure first, keep the tree fixed, and update the leaf outputs by the online data or by streaming data. And this solution, they mention, is simple and efficient. However, the performance is still worse than when you have access to the entire data first. Then they go about basically analyzing the tabular data by neural networks and basically applying the neural networks to model the tabular data. One of the problems with this is that many numerical features that are very important in the tabular data are not well utilized because most of them focus on pre-processing the categorical features and other types of pre-processing. To sum up, they mentioned that there is no universal neural network solution to fit all kinds of tabular data as well. And they claim that the method proposed in this paper does just that. Then they focus on combining the neural networks with trees. And due to the respective pros and cons of NN, they mention, they categorize the works combining neural networks and tree-based methods into two main groups. One is the tree-like neural networks, and two is converting trees to NN, or some other way you could call it neural network-like trees. So for the first part, that is tree-like NNs, they propose, like they mentioned, Google, Linnet, and other models like that have like a tree-like structure and decision ability built into the neural networks. However, they mentioned that again, the focus of these are also on computer vision tasks, and they are not fine-tuned for generalizing over the different types of tabular data tasks. And they also mentioned the NNRF, which uses the random feature combinations. And again, they mentioned that the problem with that is that the information from the actual data itself is not leveraged to make these combinations, and it sort of is closer to the implicit representations built by MLPs than to explicit representations built by, say, gradient boosting decision trees. They then talk about the second category, which is converting the trees to neural networks, and they mentioned that these works are also inefficient because they basically have to rely on very sparse neural networks and redundant modeling techniques to represent a simple decision tree. As an example, they mentioned that when there are too many trees, such conversion solution has to construct a very wide neural network to represent them, which is unfortunately hard to be applied to realistic scenarios. Then they go on and talk about NAS, or network architectural search, and they mentioned some of the works in this domain, basically trying to find out the best architecture for a task. And they mentioned that, however, some of them are merely focused on non-tabular data, such as computer vision, speech recognition, and NLP. Therefore, in terms of the domain of application, it also is limited in terms of not being perfect for tabular data. So let's go for the discussion of TabNN. So again, there are two main things that they wanted to mention, or the two key principles, is that explicitly leverage expressive feature combinations and reduce model complexity, which again, in my opinion, they're not too different, but let's go about studying them. In terms of their contribution regarding the first key principle, they mentioned that TabNN explicitly leverages the expressive feature combinations, and they contrast it to the fully connected neural networks and learning via backpropagation, which leads to discovering implicit feature combinations, mentioning and claiming that their features are more robust and can significantly increase the generalization ability. And as for the second point, they mentioned that having a blindly applied neural network leads to too many parameters, and the TabNN reduces the complexity of the design and architecture by removing the unnecessary parameters and encouraging the parameter sharing. So let's discuss TabNN algorithm. So the input to the algorithm would be the dataset D and K, which is the number of feature group sets that you want. The second step is to train the gradient boosting decision trees on D, which as the output you will get a set of trees containing many trees of depths up to 8 or more. Now, as indicated in the paper, G is the set of all feature groups. And this value is often too large because the GBDT usually ends up outputting too many trees. Now the next step is to run the feature group reduction algorithm that we will go over. The FGR algorithm starts with initializing K empty sets and also takes the hyperparameters N and alpha. So the following procedure is going to be repeated N times and the repeating index is L. So for L in 1 to N, and for every J in 1 to till K, the Lth G with the index of J would be initialized as an empty set. Now, for every feature group G in PG, now pi G here is a random processing order for the feature groups in G. Note that generally this problem that we're trying to solve here is NP-complete, so this is an approximate heuristic solution, and this helps obtaining better answer. Now we have the following formula that you see here. It reads the argument that maximizes this term here, and it's worth mentioning that this I is the index of the sets of feature groups with the index of I, the ith from the K sets of feature groups. And this operator here means that the size of the alpha soft intersection of the feature groups. What that means is that if you have a set that includes feature groups G1, G2, up until Gn, for instance, and each one of these feature groups contain a lot of features, if you basically find, so you will have basically this operator applied on this set, giving you this output, the size of this set that I'm about to write here, the number of features such that, now this, let's think of it as an indicator function that if f belongs to gi is going to output 1, else it's going to output 0. And now if you have I equal 1 to n and sum them up across all of these feature groups and divide it by n, this is going to be larger than alpha. So if you take all of the features that make this true, this number of features in this set is going to be the output of this operator. And this operator is the size of the alpha soft intersection of all the feature groups within the set. So coming back here to the FGR algorithm, we remember that the objective of the FGR was that given that we have too many trees and too many feature groups, we want to cluster these feature groups into K sets of feature groups based on the similarity. So what is happening here is that obviously since you have the argmax, you're trying to maximize a certain indication of similarity. Another way to think about it is like that. You could say that J equals the arg minimum of I, a measure of dissimilarity in some sense. The size of the alpha soft intersection of the feature groups within GIL minus the size of the alpha soft intersection of features in this. Now what this means is that you want to add G to the set of feature groups such that it does not change the size of the alpha soft intersection of all the G feature groups within it that much. So you're trying to basically minimize this value. So when you find J, obviously the next part that you need to do is to add it to the found cluster that has the highest similarity to it. Now, after running this, the idea behind L was that you would run this n times and pick the best result. So here the best is defined as the iteration or the repetition of the experiment L such that it maximizes the minimum value that we have found for the alpha soft intersection for the size of the alpha soft intersection of all the feature groups within these GJs. You could think of it as having the best worst cluster. And obviously then you would assign this new value to the GJ. So we basically discussed this algorithm here. They mentioned that although many popular methods such as correlation tests, feature clustering, PCA can be applied to obtaining the feature groups dynamically, they first failed to identify expressive complex combinations amongst the features within the same group. And that is important. And also, tree-based models provide a goldmine for discovering rich nonlinear dependencies amongst the features based on this article. Now here you will see an interesting proof by reduction based on this NP-hard problem and shows that the FGR problem in general is an NP-hard problem. Therefore, we have to just focus on the approximate solution, which was the algorithm 2 that was discussed in the previous page of this paper. Now the sets that you find after the feature group reduction have two characteristics that are important. One is the diverse importance of the different feature groups within one set due to the varying importance of trees in the gradient boosting decision trees outputs. And based on their discussion, it inspires efficient recursive neural network architecture so that more important feature groups can play a part on basically performing the task. The second characteristics has to do with many common features within one resulting set of the feature group reduction because of what we did with the alpha soft intersection of the feature groups within the sets. Now what they do is that they first reorder the feature groups in each set according to the descending importance of the corresponding trees within them, and define the ith important feature group in set GJ as GJI. Then they arrange them in a way that the input of the layers that are closer to the outputs correspond to the more important groups. And as another step that basically helps reducing the complexity of the model, RESE is designed to exponentially increase the number of feature groups. What that means is that as you're going from one layer to another, you have GJI, which is the most important feature groups in GJ, in the layer L1. And then in the next one, you have two sets of feature groups, and then in the third one, you have 4 sets of feature groups, and so on. The most important thing, or one of the most important things, is basically noting that having that maximized minimum of size of the alpha soft intersection of the features within the feature groups of the set is going to manifest itself here, and it allows sharing the parameters because you have the common features from GJ, concatenate them as a vector x hat j. So you can see that if you take the jth RESE in consideration, the x hat j, which is the common features, is going to be fed to all of these layers. We can see that the most important features in GJ is going to essentially be closer to the output, and so on and so forth. So basically, this goes back. So this sharing of parameter not only reduces the number of parameters, but also results in more efficient backpropagation. Another design hack of some sort that they have used is that the output dimension of each layer is set to be a fraction of the dimension of its input. And this fraction is 0.25 or 1/4 for the raw features and 1/2 for other inputs. They have used batch normalization and ReLU and use fully connected neural networks in different projections at the end of the pipelines to get to the outputs. The next part, which is important, is how to transfer structural knowledge from the gradient boosting decision trees to this new architecture. To do this, they first basically find all of the trees in the set of feature groups G, J, and then they sort them based on importance, similar to what we did with the feature groups. And in order to perform this transfer of structural knowledge, what they do is that they go through these trees one by one, and for each data sample, they're going to get a set of leaf indices. They're going to use one hot representation and denote it as this, which is the dth sample in the dataset. Now, having these all, basically D and LJ, for all of the samples, all of the data samples, you can see that all of the structural information is encoded in this. However, this encoding is very redundant, which makes learning from it extremely inefficient. So they use the embedding technology to retain important information and at the same time get a more concise representation. However, instead of an unsupervised autoencoder, they basically go with a fully connected neural network with one hidden layer to learn this embedding. And the corresponding value for the leaves is going to be used as training label, but they're not included in the input. And the input contains only the structural data. So here you see the datasets that they have used in this work: Yahoo, Letter, Protein, A9A, and Flight. The baselines that they have considered is the gradient boosting decision tree, the FCNN or fully connected neural networks as a traditional approach, and they have used the Microsoft Neural Network Intelligence to tune the hyperparameters to get the best one. They have the NRF only for the regression tasks, and the NNRF, which is for the classification tasks. They have several versions of the TabNN as well, meaning the R version, which randomly clusters the features into groups without using any knowledge from the gradient boosting decision tree outputs. TabNN S, which only uses the structural tree knowledge while it keeps using random feature combinations. And they did not do hyperparameter tuning based on what they say, and the learning rate was set to 0.001, K was set to 10, and alpha to 0.5 in all the experiments. They found that TabNN outperforms all the other baselines, and it is more robust in some sense, and exhibits a faster convergence. Here are the epoch metric curves with basically a bad value or MSE or error on the y-axis and epoch indices on the x-axis. And we can see that based on these results, it seems that it's the structural knowledge that actually plays a very important role. As you can see at the end of these curves on almost all three of these, aside from this one, from the one on the right, we can see that the green dots quickly come below the black dots indicating the FCNN. And the red line, which corresponds to TabNN, also has the lowest values, which is the best performance. One problem I particularly have with this paper is that the figures and tables on their own sometimes do not have enough information for us to know, for example, whether or not these correspond to train curves or test curves, but I assume it's going to be the test curves. However, based on the description, the main objective of figure 2 is to show that TabNN exhibits a quicker convergence. We can see more results in this table as well, and then also for the streaming data in table 4. And that concludes this video. Thank you so much.